What's up, everybody?
everybody?
Welcome back to the Mindset Mogul podcast. We're your hosts, Josh Jacobs and Bradley Mora, and we are back with a Q&A episode today. We actually recorded the episode already. We're doing this new thing where we do the intros after the episode on Q&As and guest
More
interviews and
profesh.
stuff like that. Yeah, so I think, Brad, what do you think about today's episode?
I thought it was great. I thought we were succinct to the point and covered, honestly, a topic that has impacted us over the course of the past 10 years. This is a if I could do it all again type of episode. This is how we would do it. So it's a good lesson for us just to like talk to each other about it, because the next 10 years we got to make look like this. And yeah, I hope if you're 5 years younger than us and we're 31 listening to this, take the advice now, because you'll be 50% ahead of where we're at.
I couldn't have said it any better. Honestly, let's leave it at that. That was great. I think you guys are going to enjoy this episode. We were very direct and to the point about everything.
You're so succinct.
Yeah, it was great. I think you guys will like it. So enjoy, tune in, and see you guys in a second. All right. So, we don't have a question from an audience member today because we're doing a Q&A episode today. I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with one of my friend's younger brothers who's in college right now. Him and his friend are starting an e-commerce store. They've already started an e-commerce store. And, basically my buddy asked if they could pick my brain for a little while and hop on a call, and I was happy to do it. And it made me think about something we should talk about for today's episode. And that is the idea of focusing on one thing until you master it versus focusing on a bunch of different things, right? Like everybody always says, that cliche saying, the average millionaire has 7 streams of income. And maybe it's true, but they probably got that 7 streams of income after mastering the first stream for 20 years. So let's talk about this for a second. The call was basically about, they were asking me all sorts of questions about, okay, so we started trying TikTok advertising, and should we continue TikTok advertising even though it hasn't worked out yet? Should we do TikTok advertising and Facebook advertising and Google advertising and influencer advertising? Should we do all these things? Should we sell on one Shopify store? Should we start multiple stores in different verticals? Should we, XYZ? There was all these, should we do this or should we do all of this? And basically the repeating thing that I said to them was, focus on one ad platform before you start focusing on, and not only just focus on one ad platform, focus on one type of ad on one type of ad platform before you start on all these other platforms. Because if you can't master TikTok, if you're only doing TikTok ads, then what makes you think you're going to be able to master TikTok, Facebook, Google, influencer all at the same time? You have to focus on one thing and become an absolute master of it before you can move on to the next thing. I think what I was saying specifically was, until you can walk away from the TikTok ads, maybe they're managed by a staff and you could spend less than 10 minutes a day on it and they're going to run as if you were there the whole time. That's when you walk away from that. Same idea with multiple Shopify stores. If you have one Shopify store, you should build that until the point where you could go on vacation for 2 weeks and nothing will be affected because it's being run by staff. At that point, you can start a second Shopify store. But why start 4 if you can't even master 1? If you can't get 1 off the ground, you're not going to get 4 off the ground. And I think this is a really interesting topic to talk about, because I'm sure we've been through it, Brad, me and you. We can talk about this a little bit, like in the earlier part of our careers. Maybe we even still deal with it now. But I know for a fact that when I started, when I was younger, their age, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, I wanted to do everything. I felt like the more I did, I had the same mindset as that. Like, why start one store when I could start 4 stores? Why only advertise on TikTok when I could advertise on all these different platforms? And the mindset switch of mastery was what I needed to actually start creating some success for myself. And that's what I tried to portray onto them. And that's what I want to do in this episode, is kind of talk about maybe our experiences of like going from focusing on all different things and maybe having shiny object syndrome or whatever they call, to focusing on just, let me master my craft and become the absolute best at it. And I think as long as you guys, the audience, focuses on mastery versus, quantity of things you're doing, you are going to get massively ahead. Because if you focus on mastery, you're competing with a bunch of other people who are just focused on trying to do everything everywhere. So it's going to be a lot easier for you to beat those people in what you are a master at. So, Brad, sorry, that was a
Can,
long intro to
can
that,
I can
but
I chime in on one thing you said that I thought
please do.
was interesting? You had mentioned that the trigger point for moving from one store to another store, moving from one ad platform to another ad platform was once it's running on its own, which I think is 100% correct. I think, and you touch on this when you talk about mastery, but all of the in between that happens before you get to the point where it's running on its own is actually getting it to work. And I think there's an aspect of doing 2 to 5 things at a time instead of one. None of those things may ever work if you don't just focus on that own thing and crack the code on it. And so it is what you said with mastery, but it can't run on its own until you actually just crack the code. And you have to assume that there's an immense amount of trial and error and iteration and focus. And you can't iterate and you can't trial and you can't fall forward unless you're just focused on a single thing and doing that quickly, failing fast into success, basically. And so I think that remains true for the store that they're putting together. So am I selling the right products to the right people? Does it have product market fit? Is it something that has margins that make sense that I can run a store on? There's an infinite number of questions to get right, especially in an e-commerce store, highly competitive market. Like, where are you going to find your small niche that you can carve out space in? So answering that question, there's an infinite number of questions to go get right for that to get to a point that it could be self-sustaining at all, that you need to go answer. And so if you're trying to answer all those questions while you're trying to answer all those questions for another store at the same time, you'll probably only get halfway on both and it's a failure. And the same thing is true for ad platforms, where it's really hard to know what's going to get people's attention more than what other people are doing to get people's attention. And then when they get the attention, to make it click and pull them down through a funnel and then make them want to buy something. There's another infinite set of questions. It's not infinite, but there's a lot of questions to go tweak and get answers on and improve upon before you could even consider something as self-sustaining. There's the core of it working, and then there's the actual operations of it, like finding the people to go do it for you once you've cracked the code. And so when you realize just how many steps there are to getting those things right and how difficult they are, it's got to be done in sequential order, not simultaneously. And it's really just, it's a time problem. You don't have hours in the day. You don't have enough focus. You don't have enough attention. You're fighting human capacity and nature and the laws of physics if you try to do multiple things well at one time. It's like a horrible mirror of trying to multitask on something. Like, if you're trying to text and write on Slack and answer email at the same time, it's not going to go very well. Well, that's trying to run 3 e-commerce stores at the same time. It's not going to go very well.
It's so funny you say that, because it literally earlier this morning, I was doing that. I was responding to a text. I was responding to an email. I was trying to manage something else. And I actually got really frustrated for a second because I kept messing up a couple things. And I didn't even connect that until you just said that. But I was literally doing the same thing. The idea is focus on each task as it comes. Even when it's as little as something like an email or, like data entry or whatever I was doing earlier. And that is the essence of just, it's not going to be done as well if you're focusing on 3 different things versus one thing. And it might be done completely wrong. And you might not, like to Brad's point, if you're focusing on 2 or 3 or 4 different things, you may have lost your opportunity to figure out the one thing because your knowledge is spread too thin. Your effort is spread too thin. Your time is spread too thin now. Whereas if you would have just focused on the one thing, maybe you actually would have taken off and had a bunch of success there, but you ruined your chances because you spread that out too thin across too many different areas.
We did this a lot in the earlier episodes, but the macro and the micro of this is that focus is a skill and a muscle. And candidly, this is something over the next 4 months that I'm personally working on because my phone has totally fucked up my attention span. And I'll just if it's in the room, I'll reach for it. I'm like, okay, me reaching for that phone is me fracturing the attention and focus onto whatever else I was doing. Like right now in our business, we're trying to come up with how are we positioning our new service offering? And there's a lot of language that goes into that. There's a lot of evaluating competitors. There's understanding people's problems and are we speaking to them well? And just to make the point, there's an infinite number of questions I need to go answer on this topic, which this is psychology principle, but it takes you at least 20 minutes to get into flow state, into thinking about something, prime your brain to actually go answer those questions. And so as soon as you're reaching for a phone, I mean, in my mind, that 20-minute clock has like restarted. And so that's the micro. And then the macro version of this is if you only get 25% of the necessary questions answered about how are these ads going to work? Like, first of all, who am I producing them with? How am I going to message things to the customers? Like, what platform am I using? The steady number of questions you need to go answer. If you're moving on to the next thing, like you're only pushing and penetrating that series of things a fraction of what it needs to be. So I think that's the macro version. And I think overall, the fact that, look, everyone in the world, I mean, not everyone in the world, but there are a lot of people out there trying to eat your lunch. And so you need to be humbled and think and know that, yes, it's going to take 100% of your attention, especially when you're doing something for the first time, that it needs 100% of your attention because you can't go beat. Yeah, there are people running 10 stores, but they earn that. And so, like, for you, if you can think for a second that you can even compete with one of their stores doing more than one thing at a time, I think that's you're setting yourself up for failure.
I love that. And the other thing that you just made me think of too is that kind of goes hand in hand with this is just having patience. Like, again, it comes down to mastery. To become a master of something, you have to be willing to fail over and over and over and over and over again and learn from all of those failures and reiterate until you figure out what works. And like, it's so funny because just talking to them, I mean, they're super ambitious. I loved that conversation I had with them yesterday. But it was interesting because, it reminded me a little bit of when I was younger. They're like, we tried TikTok and, it hasn't worked yet so far. And I'm thinking, and they've only posted, a handful of videos or whatever, and they promoted one of them. But like I said, listen, guys, this is going to take a while. Like, this is going to take, at minimum 6 months. At most, it's going to take years or never happen. But like, you have to be willing to put in the time. I go, you guys are 19 years old right now. Like, if you put in the time and you stay focused and you stay smart and you don't blow money on stupid stuff when you make it, like, by the time you're my age, 12 years from now, you could have millions of dollars in the bank and be completely financially free for the rest of your life if you continue with this mindset and take it in the longer term right now. But it reminded me of myself because, and then they brought up the fact that their friend, on their first video got 2 million views and sold a bunch of product. And I'm like, that's a 1 in a million literally possibility. Yeah, is it possible? Yes. But here's the other thing I told them. That may have happened, but now what? It was one video that went viral. If he didn't learn a scalable traffic method, sure, he may make a bunch of money off that one product he's selling in that one viral video, but then what? What if he doesn't know what to do after that? The whole idea here is to build yourself up for longevity. And if you are focusing on mastering something, typically that's going to provide longevity for you. And you're not going to just fall after a little bit of success, which is what's happened to so many people. It's happened to me before multiple times in my career. And it's because I wasn't focused on mastery, which now I feel like I'm literally I focus on my one industry, what I'm doing, my one vertical in my one industry, and just becoming the best at it. And ever since switching to that mindset, things have gotten, way better financially. So that's what I would say also, in addition to just not having shiny object syndrome and focusing on so many different things, is have patience with the one thing you are focusing on, because mastery takes freaking time. Reading every book on the subject takes time. Watching every training video on the subject takes time. Doing a bunch of tests and failures and reiteration yourself takes time. These things take months, maybe years, and you have to be willing to go through that process. Otherwise, you're better off just going and getting a job, because you're going to get paid more to have a job than you would in those beginning few years. But what you're doing is setting yourself up so that in 12 years from now, you could have millions of dollars in your bank account, or 20 years from now, whatever the case may be. You're setting yourself up for the future. And you have to keep the long term view when you're doing all of these things, which is something I never did when I was their age. And that's why I feel like it's so important to talk about now.
Oh man, if I could go back and just, even if I didn't love it, just picked one thing, learned to love it for a decade. Look, we'd be definitely 8 figure, probably 9 figure guys. I'm gonna just call a spade a spade. I mean, that's what it is. You can
Exactly.
pick a thing for a decade. The odds of you not cracking the egg in that time, it gets low after an immense amount of time. And so, because you just have so many at bats to go figure it out. So as long as you can stay alive and keep playing, and
And a big part of the game is just outlasting other people who also fall off. I mean, I know like one of my favorite guys to listen to, PBD, Patrick Bet David. He always says, I go on 3 20-year runs. I'm going on 3 20-year runs in my life. From 20 to 40, it was the insurance run. I knew I was going to give 20 years. I was going to build this company. He just sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars. My next 20 years, I'm building a media business. I know I'm going to build this for 20 years. I'm going to become a master. I'm going to do everything I possibly can for the next 20 years. And then after that, who knows what my next 20-year run will bring. But I've got the long-term view, and I'm looking at things not from a 1 or 2 year play, but from a 20-year play. What can I build in the next 20 years? And that type of mindset, to your point, I wish I had that type of mindset when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, because it would put me, you know, 7 or 8 years ahead of where I am now, because I've only had that mindset for a few years now. So, yeah, man.
100%.
I think this is really good. You got anything else to add? Because I think we covered, like, just to recap real quick, the biggest thing is focusing on mastery, because number one, by focusing on becoming mastery, you're setting yourself up to have longevity in whatever you do. You're setting yourself up to beat the competition because you're going to be better than them. And aside from that, avoiding shiny object syndrome, because then you will it all comes down to mastery, really. If you have shiny object syndrome, you're not going to be a master at the things that you need to be a master at. If you aren't patient, you're not going to become a master at the things that you master at. If you're trying all these different things, like Brad said, and spread too thin, you're not going to be able to become a master at what you need to become a master at. So that's really the recap. I think those are the most important points I would like to give to my 18-year-old self. What do you think?
Let's wrap it up. I think that was great.
All right, sounds good. Guys, if you got any value out of this episode, please like and subscribe and comment on our YouTube channel. Give us a follow and leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We appreciate you. We love you. Thank you so much. We will see you in the next episode. Have a great day.